Hi, I'm Gillisy Jr. On behalf of all of us here at Team Losi, I'd like to thank you for choosing this Team Losi product. In the next hour, Jack Johnson, Gary Keyes, Kyle Reed, Ron Rossetti, Jay Halsey, and myself will be taking you through the step-by-step building process of the Junior 2 and Junior T kits. In addition, we will pass along some helpful hints, techniques, and tuning tips to help you tune your car to its optimum performance and enjoyment level. There are many parts that can be confused, so we have strategically packed the bags in your kit to match the instruction manual. So if you take your time and follow the instructions, this kit will go together much quicker and easier than expected. Once again, thank you for choosing Team Losi. Now on to the assembly with Jack Johnson.
Now I'm going to take you through the assembly of your Junior 2 and Junior T kits. Before you get started, you're going to want to find a clean cloth or a towel to lay over your work table. It's a good idea not to work over a high carpeted area too, because if you lose some parts on the floor, they're going to be very difficult to find. You may want to get a small tray or a dish to put your smaller screws and E-clips and such in as you go through the assembly of this car too. Remember to look over the safety notes at the beginning of your manual. And now before we get started, let's look at some of the tools you'll need. You'll need a number 2 Phillips screwdriver, a small regular bladed screwdriver, needle nose pliers, regular pliers, an X-Acto knife to trim some flashing off of parts, a pair of scissors to trim Lexan and bodies, and some optional tools that aren't required but will make things easier are 3/16, 1/4 inch, and 3/8 inch nut drivers. We've included in the manual a hardware guide to help you through all the steps of this assembly. Simply match up the parts to the silhouettes on the top of every step. You'll want to find yourself a cutting block so that you can remove the flashing from your plastic parts. This is especially important on your suspension parts and all of your moving parts in your transmission. Although our manual doesn't cover radio installation, later on we will cover installation of our Airtronics transmitter and our Novak 410 M5 speed control. Also look forward to some tips from world-famous drivers on car maintenance, car setup, and driving. Now that you've opened bag A, let's start with figure 1. First take the 440 by 1 inch screw and place it into the top of the tower. Now you'll need to thread this screw all the way through. And once this screw is tight, you'll need to take your 3/16 inch by 3/8 inch studded ball, place it into this hole of your shock tower. To tighten this, you can either use the Team Losi wrench supplied in your kit or an optional 3/16 inch nut driver. Once this is tight, you need to attach the nylon nut on the opposite side. Now you need to repeat all of these steps for side 2 of your shock tower. Now on to figure 2. We need to attach our front shock tower to our front bulkhead using 2 440 by 5/8 inch screws. Now that our front shock tower is attached, we can move on to figure 3. Now we're going to attach our front A-arms. We need to start this by placing the hinge pin into the front of the arm, placing the bulkhead between the arm, and sliding the pin through. Now that the pin is through the other side of the arm, we'll attach these small E-clips into the grooves of the pin. This can be done by hand if you have small enough hands, or it may require a small regular screwdriver or a pair of needle nose pliers. Next, you need to locate the chassis in the bottom of your box, and we're going to attach the steering posts into the holes in the forward part of the chassis. This is done by using the smallest of the Allen wrenches supplied with the kit and putting the 440 flathead into the bottom of the chassis and into the steering post. Next, on figure 5, if you're building a Junior T, you'll need to assemble your front body mount bumper. This is done by placing the 440 by 5/16 inch screw through the front of the bumper and attaching the mount. You want to start with the second lowest hole in the mount. Once you have both sides tightened, it's time to assemble the front end to the chassis. Now, if you're building a Junior T, you want to use this bumper we just assembled. If you're building a Junior 2, you want to use this smaller bumper here, which is what we're going to use for our video. You need to place the bumper underneath and sandwich the chassis between the front end assembly and the bumper. Now that we have both of our forward screws into the bulkhead, we need to place the rear screws in as well. Once you have all 4 of these screws in place, you should check that you have free front arm movement on both sides of the car. If not, you may need to trim some flashing off. Now we're on to figure 6, which is our battery lid. We need to peel off the backing from the foam, place it on the bottom of the lid. Then we need to come over here and attach the lid through the chamfered end and into the box. Once you have this screw tightened, make sure that your lid rotates freely and place your body pan in the opposite side. Now in figure 7, we'll attach this battery compartment to the chassis. This is done by placing 4 832 by ½ inch screws into the bottom of the chassis and into the battery compartment. Once you have all 4 of these screws tightened and in place, we need to attach the antenna mount. This is done by taking the smallest Allen wrench, placing it through this hole of the chassis here, and into the antenna mount. You may want to use pliers to get this good and tight. Once you have it tightened, be sure that the slot is pointing rearward. Then take your antenna cap, place it over the post, snap it in place. Now in figure 8, we're going to place the wing tubes into the wing tube holes of the rear bulkhead. Push this in using a pair of pliers until you hear it snap on the other side. If you're assembling a Junior T, you won't have these wing tubes because they are not used. Once that is in place, you need to take a 3/8 inch studded ball and place it into this hole of your rear bulkhead. It will be the lower one towards the inside. You need to tighten this up and repeat both of these steps for the other side. Once everything from figure 8 is attached, we can move on to figure 9. First thing we'll want to do here is attach the rear shock mounts to the rear shock tower. This is done with a 440 by 7/8 inch Allen screw. Once you have both top shock mounts in place, it's time to attach the rear shock tower to the rear bulkhead. Now this is indexed, so it should line up on its own. And you need to attach it with 4 440 by 5/8 inch cap head screws. Once we have all 4 of these screws in place, we can attach the rear bulkhead assembly to the chassis. This is done by first taking one 440 by 3/8 inch flathead screw on each side, one here and one here, and securing it into the rear bulkhead. Once both of these screws are in place and tight, we can attach the 2 832 by ½ inch flathead screws into these 2 holes here. And once these 2 screws are tight, we need to place one of these little gold washers onto a 440 by 3/8 inch cap head and attach these 2 screws through the chassis support and into the rear bulkhead, one on each side. Once you have this screw tight and the one in place on the other side, bag A is complete, and this is what your assembly should look like at this point. Now that we've opened up bag B, the first step will be figure 11. First thing we want to do is put this 3/8 inch studded ball into the servo saver like this. We want to tighten this all the way down. Once you have the studded ball tightened and in place, we'll want to place the servo saver over the left steering post and secure it with an E-clip. Then we can take the idler arm, place it over the right-hand steering post, and once again secure it with an E-clip also. Now we want to take the shorter of the studded balls in bag B and place a gold washer over it and attach it to the furthest hole outward on the steering sector arm. I'm going to do this to both sides of the sector arm. Once you have both balls in place and tightened, we're going to place the sector arm onto the steering assembly of the chassis. First we'll take the shoulder screw and put it through the servo saver and into the sector arm. Once both of these shoulder screws are tightened and in place, put this assembly aside so we can start on the front suspension in figure 12. First, we need to cut these supports off of the front spindle carriers. The first step of figure 12 is to place the front axle into the front spindle. You want to slide this all the way through so that the hole is aligned all the way through the part. Once you have both of these assemblies complete, we can now put the axle and spindle into the spindle carrier. You want to pay close attention so that you get the top of the spindle carrier on the same side as the letter R or L. Now we'll take the hinge pin and place it all the way through the assembly. Once you have the pin through evenly on both ends, we'll want to attach it with an E-clip on either end of this assembly. Once all of your E-clips are in place, you want to start by putting a studded ball into the top of your spindle carrier, being sure that you put it in from the rear, or the same direction that the spindle is pointing. Once we have both of these ball studs in place, we want to put a ball stud in the top side of both of the spindles. Once we have these studded balls in place on both assemblies, we're finished with figure 12. Now we're going to take the left-hand assembly from figure 12 and put it on the left A-arm in the beginning of figure 13. Slide the hinge pin all the way through to the other end of the arm. Since this is a tight fit, you may want to use a pair of pliers. Once you have the hinge pin evenly on both ends, we want to attach an E-clip on both sides. And you want to repeat this step for the right-hand side. To begin figure 14, we want to remove all of the threaded ball ends. We want to take two threaded ends and place one on each end of an 1.5 inch long threaded rod. Using the front and rear camber link on your adjustment tool, tighten both ends evenly until it just fits in between the ends. Now we want to do the same thing with a 1 7/8 inch threaded rod. This time we want to use the location on our tool marked front tie rods. Once again, tightening down until it just fits in between, like so. Now that we have all 4 of these, we're ready to put them onto the front suspension. We want to place the shorter of our rods on the top for our camber link. This is done by snapping a ball cup over each end of the studded ball. Now we'll put the longer of our rods as our tie rod. Place one end on our spindle, like so. And one end on our sector arm. We'll want to repeat this procedure on the other side. Now with all 4 rods in place, we can move on and put our top stiffener in place. We're just going to barely put these screws in because we're going to remove this later in the radio installation. Now bag B is complete, and your assembly should look like this. Now we're going to start bag C with figure 17. Note that the short end next to the groove on the shaft is on this side. And we want to place this pin into the hole on the opposite side and slide the gear across and into the groove. Then we'll secure it in place with an E-clip on the opposite side of the gear. Now I'll attach an E-clip in this groove here and this groove here. And your top gear assembly is complete. Now we want to take half of our transmission housing and place an 8x14 bearing in both sides of the outdrive. Now we'll take an outdrive gear, place it from the inside through both bearings. We'll take our output shaft and slide the seal over the top like so. We want to index these so they line up and key in. Place a 1/2 inch 440 screw in and tighten it. Once this screw is tight, repeat this assembly for the other side. In figure 20, we'll assemble our differential. First, we'll take a 3/32 ball and put it into each hole of the center differential gear. Once all the balls are in place, we can take a small toothpick or the smallest Allen wrench supplied with the kit and dab a small amount of grease on each side of each ball. Now that we have grease on both sides of each ball, we'll set the assembly aside for a few moments while we finish the rest of the differential. Next, we want to take our bushing and insert it to the female half of the differential. On the opposite end of that same half, we want to put our 540 lock nut into the hex area. Now we can take and put our drive washer over the hex and do the same thing on the male half. Now we take our center differential gear, place it over the male half of the differential, and place the female half over this assembly. We'll set this assembly aside now, and it'll be referred to as Assembly D in your manual. Now we want to take our 540 by 7/8 button head screw and place 3 Belleville washers over it. We want to make sure that we oppose these so that we get the big side to the big side and the small side to the small side. Next, we can take a small ring and place it over the last Belleville washer. Now we want to apply some grease to this washer. We want to get a thin coat of grease all the way around this ring. Once we've done this, we can open our little bag with a thrust bearing cage and continue our assembly. Now we want to place our thrust bearing cage over our screw and insert one 1/16 inch ball into each hole. The balls are very, very small. Care should be taken not to lose any of them. It may help to put a small amount of grease on the end of the Allen wrench or toothpick so that you can pick one ball up at a time and do this. Once all the balls are in place, we want to add a little more grease to this side of the assembly. Once we've done this, we take our other washer, place it over the top, take this assembly, place it into the opposite end of the nut on assembly D, and start to tighten. You want to be careful not to tighten this too much, as you can damage the balls inside. You should have a fairly smooth movement this way and quite a bit of resistance when you try and slip one side. In figure 23, we'll place the ball bearings into the transmission half. Once these are in place, we can place our differential assembly in the center, paying close attention to make sure that the screw head is pointing to the side with the hole in it for adjustment. Once this is in place, we can place our top gear in, being careful not to damage the teeth as we do so. With the bearings in both halves of the transmission, we can now put the two pieces together, being sure that all the gears are aligned as we put them together all the way. Then we take our motor plate, place it over the right half of the transmission housing like so, and place a screw into the top rear, bottom rear, and the forward bottom holes. We're going to leave the top forward one out for this time. Once these are all in place, we can tighten them, threading them into the motor plate on the opposite side. Now in figure 26, we'll take our universal pivot and try and open up this hole a little bit to make it a little easier to get the pin into it. Once this is done, we take this pin, place it at the beginning of the hole, and squeeze it through with a pair of pliers or a small vise if you have one handy. We want to push this pin through so it sticks out evenly from both ends of the pivot. We want to make 2 of these assemblies. Now we want to fit this pivot into one of our slider joints. Using the Team Losi tool, you can pry it into the opposite end and into the hole. This part should rotate fairly easily. If not, you can crimp this lightly, being careful not to damage the plastic part, to free up the rotation of this piece. We want to do this to both pieces. Now we want to take each of these assemblies and place it onto our transmission output in the same manner that we placed this into the slider. Once again, using the Team Losi tool and prying it in to the opposite hole. And here again, if it doesn't rotate freely, you can use a pair of pliers and lightly crimp on it again. In figure 28, we'll attach our spur gear. First, we place a small pin through the output shaft in the gearbox. And then we slide the spur gear over the top of that pin, making sure that the pin slides into the key on the back side, and attach it with the E-clip. Now we'll attach the transmission to the rear of the chassis. First, we take the rear pivot support, place it over the rear of the transmission like so. We'll slide this whole assembly into the rear bulkhead on the chassis. Once this is in place, we want to put one screw into each of these 4 holes. Once all 4 of these screws are tightened and in place, now we'll take our small 440 flathead screw and place it into the very rear of the chassis and into the motor plate. Once this screw is tightened, we can turn our car back over. The first thing we want to do is put a little dust cap over the adjustment hole in the side of the transmission. Then we can take our long 440 cap head screw, place the little washer over it, slide it through the rear bulkhead, through the transmission, and tighten it into the motor plate on the opposite side. Once this screw is tight, bag C is complete, and your assembly should look like this. First thing we want to do in figure 30, which is our first step of bag D, is remove all of these bushings from their tree. Now we'll take 2 of these bushings and put them into each one of our rear hub carriers. Once we've done this, we can take our 3/8 inch studded ball and place it into the center hole of the rear camber link. Once this ball stud is tight, you want to do another assembly for the opposite side, making sure that you get the ball sticking out of 2 different directions. We want to remove this support from both of the H-arms. After we do so, we need to trim the little bit of flashing that's left behind. Now we want to pay close attention to the left and the right of these arms. The right side will go with this hub carrier, and the left side will go with this hub carrier. Now we want to take our rear outer hinge pin from figure 31, place it partially through the outer of the right-hand H-arm and into the top hole of the rear hub carrier. We want to get it through so that it's partially sticking out. And then we can put this clip on this side, and then we can center it up and put the other clip on the opposite side. We want to repeat this for the left-hand side as well. Once the hinge pin is most of the way in, we'll take this groove here and place an E-clip on it. Then we can push our hinge pin in the rest of the way. You may need the assistance of a small tool to push this in the rest of the way. And we'll put an E-clip on this groove over here. We need to repeat this step on the left side as well. Now that we have both the left and the right side on, your assembly should look like this after completion of figure 32. In figure 33, we want to make our rear camber link assemblies. We do this by taking the threaded rod and placing a threaded rod end onto either side. Once again, we want to use our adjustment tool and thread these down to where the rear camber link just slides in between these. We need to do this one more time so that we wind up with two complete assemblies. In figure 34, we're going to take a rear pivot, place it in between the axle, aligning the hole all the way through, and then place the pin into this hole, and using a pair of pliers or a small vise again, squeeze it all the way through until it is even on both ends. We need to repeat this so we have two rear axle assemblies. Once again, free movement is very important. In figure 35, we'll take our axle assembly from figure 34 and place it into a rear slider, using the Team Losi tool again to get it in place. Free movement again is very important, so you can take a pair of pliers and lightly crimp to obtain the free movement. We need to repeat this for the other side as well. In figure 36, we'll take our rear axle, put it through the bushings of the rear assembly, align the splines, rotating them slowly if they don't align, and then we'll attach the upper camber link first to the hub carrier, and then to the rear bulkhead. For figure 37, if you're building a junior T, we need to attach the rear body mount. First, you need to trim this down to the height that we recommend for the stock body, which will be this third hole here, which means you need to cut it to this line right here. With the rear body mount trimmed, we'll place it between the ears on the transmission. Now we'll take a 440 by ½ inch screw, place a washer over it, slide it through from the back side and through the hole of the mount. Place another washer on the back side along with a 440 nut, and we'll take the other 440 screw with washer and place it through the other side with another washer and nut and tighten them both down. In figure 36, we also want to take and put the rear spacer over the rear axle and then slide the pin into the hole in the axle. I'll do this on both the left and the right side of the car. At this point, bag D is complete, and your car should look like this. First step of our shock assembly is to remove the cartridges from the shock bodies. Then we'll want to open our shock oil container, dip the grooved end of the shaft into the oil so that we can slide the cartridge onto it without damaging the O-ring inside. Now we want to grab in between these two grooves here with a pair of needle nose or small vice grips and thread our shock bottom on up to the base of the threads. Once we've gotten this done, take an E-clip, put it on a lower groove, and slide our shock piston onto that groove. Be sure to trim the flashing off of the shock piston before you attach it. We'll attach another E-clip onto the top of the piston. Now our shaft assembly is complete. Next, we're going to fill our shock body with shock fluid. I'm going to fill it just to the beginning of the threads. You want to be sure to get a small shock body with a small shock shaft. And we'll start threading the cartridge in with the shaft about halfway compressed. This should bleed the shock to its proper level of oil. You should get free movement all the way down with a slight amount of rebound at the bottom. If it doesn't compress all the way, you need to bleed a little more oil. Now we want to clean all the fluid off of the outside of the shock. Shock fluid is water soluble, so the regular water should take it off just fine. Once you've cleaned it all off, we can place the ball into the shock bottom and snap it into place like so. Free movement here is very important as well. And once again, we can crimp it a little bit with the pliers to free up the movement. Once the ball's in place, we're going to snap our shock spring retainer over the top of the shock bottom. And we'll take our shock spring and place it over the top. Once again, we want to be careful to get the short springs with the short shocks. Now we want to take our 440 by 3/8 cap head, put it into the large end of the shock clamp, and start to thread at the end of the other end. With the thread started, we'll place it over the top of the shock body so that it just touches the spring, and we'll tighten it down. We want to repeat this step for all 4 of the shocks, being careful to get the short shafts with the short bodies and the short springs with the short shocks. In figure 44, we'll take the bracelet we removed from the H-arms in figure 31 and remove this small spacer. We'll use the 2 of these to mount the bottom of the shocks to the rear of the car. Now on the bottom of the rear shock, we're going to slide a 5/8" 440 screw through the ball. Then we'll take the spacer that we just removed, put it on the opposite end of the ball. We'll come onto the rear H-arm into the center hole here and attach it. And we don't want to tighten the screw all the way. We want to leave just a little bit of in-play here. Once that's in place, we can attach the top of the shock to the mount and then place the 440 nylon nut onto the screw and tighten it. In figure 45, we'll attach the front shocks. The first thing we do here is take a 1/2" 440 screw, place it into the inside hole of the front arm, and start to thread it in. Now with the screw just barely showing to the inside of the arm, we want to place the bottom of the shock in so we can put the screw the rest of the way through. Screw is tight. We'll take the top of the shock, place it over the top mount, and we'll attach the 440 nylon nut to the front shock tower. You may want to hold this from behind with the Allen wrench as you tighten it. Once you've completed this, repeat this one more time to the other side of the car. Bag E is now complete, and your car should look like this at this point. To start off with bag F, once again we need to remove the bushings from the tree. Now we'll mount the tires onto the wheels. If there's any flashing on the inside of the tire, be sure to remove it before you put it on the wheel. It's easiest if you slide the wheel in sideways and then rotate it straight and pull a bead of the tire in between the 2 ribs on the rim. Try and get it on there as straight as possible. You want to do this for the front tires as well. The truck tires and wheels are done in almost the same manner. It's a little easier on the truck wheels though, if you just slide it straight through rather than trying to put it in sideways. It's a good idea too to glue your tires to your wheels. We're going to cover that a little bit later in the tip section. And now we'll put the bushings into the wheels, like so. Now we'll slide the front wheel over the front axle and attach it with a nylon lock nut onto the outer part of the axle. Be sure not to over tighten these nuts to allow free rotation of the front wheel. Now to attach the rear wheels, first you want to make sure that this pin is sticking out equally on both sides of the rear axle. And you simply slide the rear wheel over the rear axle and lock it onto that pin and tighten the lock nut from the outside. Once you have both of your rear wheels in place and the nuts tightened, bag F assembly is complete. Now we're on to bag G, which is the final assembly bag for the car. For this application, we're going to use a Revolution stock motor. This is an additional item and is not included in the kit. First we'll install our motor. This is done by attaching it to the motor plate using the 2 slotted holes with a 3mm screw and washer into the threaded holes on the motor can. Now with both screws installed, but not tightened so we can still adjust our gear mesh, we'll attach our pinion gear. First we want to put the set screw into the pinion gear partially and slide the pinion gear onto the motor shaft so the set screw is against the flat part of the shaft, and tighten the set screw down. Be sure to leave a small gap between the motor and the edge of the pinion gear. Then we'll slide the gear forward until we get just a slight amount of backlash and tighten both screws down firmly. Refer to figure 50 of your instruction manual and trim out your side gear cover. You will also need to trim this a little more to clear the rear camber link. Be careful not to get into the area up here. This will be needed to attach it to the forward screw. Now we'll need to make some small holes where the indentations are on the gear cover. Now we want to place the gear cover onto the side of the motor plate by sliding it over this forward screw and first attaching it with the screw in the back to the hole in the motor plate. Now we'll take our 440 nylon nut and place it onto the exposed part of the screw on the forward part of our gear cover. Now we need to refer to figure 50 in the instruction manual once again and trim out our wing. Now we want to drill some holes where the dimples are in your wing so we can mount our wing buttons. It's easiest if you do this with a hole reamer, which you can find at any local hardware store. Next we need to clean off the flashing around the hole. Next we need to remove our wing buttons from the tree that they're mounted on. Next we'll place our wing buttons into the wing with a small groove pointing towards the outside of the wing. And we'll snap the bottom wing button with the hole towards the outside of the wing as well. Once you have both sides mounted, you can now take the wing wire and slide it through the wing buttons from the rear. Now we want to slide the wing wire forward, past the bend, and up to the flat area. Then we'll flip the wing over and turn our wing buttons to lock the wing in place. Once you have the wing wire evenly through both sides of the wing, you need to take and bend the wire a little more at the pre-bend. Now with both wires bent, we can mount our wing into the wing tubes like so. You may want to put a slight bend down in the lower part of the wing wire to keep it firmly in the wing tube. The height may be adjusted by trimming off the bottom of the wire, the angle by the amount of bend you have here, and the position just by simply rotating these, sliding the wing forward or back, and locking them back in place. Referring to figure 50 in your instruction manual, we now need to cut out the body. Once you have the outside portion done, we need to come back in and remove these areas in here for your body mounts. We can do this once again with the reamer, just like we did for the wing. We need to knock out those two areas for your body mounts, this one for your antenna hole, and these two marked back here for your wing wire. And remember once again to trim the flashing off of all the holes that you just put in your body. Now with everything in place, your body should mount right onto the car like so. Now this pretty much completes your basic assembly of your car. Now we're going to turn you over to Gary Kais to give you some tips on painting your body and your wing. Then we'll turn you over to Larry from Airtronics, who'll help you in the installation of your radio system, followed by Tyree Phillips from Novak Electronics with the installation of your speed control. Then later on, we'll show you some tips out at the track.
Hi, I'm Gary Kais. In the next 2 minutes, I'm going to pass along 20 years of body painting experience to you. So get your body and your tape and your paint and get ready to go. After you've trimmed your body to fit the chassis, wash the body thoroughly with warm water and liquid dishwashing detergent. This removes any oil and residue left from your fingers or anything that was left on the chassis. Next step is to take and use the handy pre-cut window masks supplied by Team Losi. Remove them carefully from the sheet. Locate one corner up along the scribe lines. Oops. They can be pulled back off as long